Greetings, everyone! I'm not here today, as you no doubt have noticed. Instead, I've gifted you with the lovely gift of a recording of government notes instead. So we're going to pick up where we left off on Wednesday in your notes. So what you need to do is take out your notebooks, and we left off talking about the qualifications and the design of Congress, specifically the upper and lower house. So if you would, go ahead and take out your notes if you haven't done so already. I'll wait. Actually, I'll go get some water. Right. It should have been enough time. So, we pick up talking about the upper and lower house. We were talking about the fact that in theory, the Congress is equal, the House and the Senate, but in reality, the Senate is considered to be the upper house, and the House of Representatives is considered to be the lower house. Now, we talked about a couple of reasons why. One is the fact that there are fewer people in the Senate, 100 senators to 435 members of the House, and so one vote out of 100 is worth more than 435. The second thing we talked about is that they have longer terms. The Senate is made up, the senators get 6-year terms, whereas the representatives get 2-year terms. And the senators are also, only a third of the Senate is up for re-election at any one time, whereas all of the House is up for re-election at the same time. So as a result, the House members have to constantly be worried about re-election, whereas the senators, not so much. The senators have a bit more leeway, a bit more relaxed attitude. And the third reason why we've got sort of the upper and the lower house is, again, it's kind of historical that way. Remember that we stole this design from England, the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and so in that analogy, the House of Representatives is the House of Commons, the one for the average person. And the Senate then becomes the House of Lords for the upper class and so forth. In fact, originally, the Senate was appointed by the government, was appointed rather than elected, just like the House of Lords. Up until 1913, senators were chosen by the states, not by the people. So they would just pick whomever they felt like. The problem with that is that the states basically started giving out the jobs to whoever gave them the most money. This is why the nickname of the Senate became the Millionaires Club. Again, the Millionaires Club was the nickname for the Senate prior to 1913 because the states would oftentimes pick the richest people or the people who donated the most money to become the new senators, regardless of their actual skill level. This, of course, wasn't the best way to do it, but that's the way it was. Unfortunately, this led to quite a few senators being, just terribly corrupt and incompetent, and so in 1913 we passed the 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment allows for congressmen to be voted for by the people rather than picked by the state governments. And so in theory, at least, they would now pick representatives who did what they wanted and did what they were supposed to do, rather than just the guys who give them the most money. So, that's the qualifications and the differences. Otherwise, the House and the Senate, again, functionally are identical. They both serve the same purpose. They investigate, they pass laws, and the Senate and the House have to agree for a bill to become a law. The House and the Senate must agree on a law before it can become a law. This is a good time to mention that if you haven't figured it out by now, you can feel free to rewind and pause and so forth on these videos if I'm going too fast, which, Lord knows I probably am. So feel free to pause, rewind, and so forth. Also, I will put this on YouTube so that you can email me and I'll send you the link if you would like to watch it again sometime to either catch things that you missed or you're having insomnia, difficulty sleeping, and you just like something to soothe you to sleep, like the melodious sound of my voice. But in any case, we pick up now then with checks and balances. We've talked about checks and balances before. Remember, checks and balances are the ability of one branch of government to control the others. We talked about Congress's broad powers, like the power of the purse, the power of the veto, the power of impeachment, and so forth. But there's a couple other ones that we didn't actually talk about in the last chapter. For example, oversight. Oversight is the ability of Congress to essentially investigate the functions of any other part of government, whether it be the states or the national government, like the executive branch, or pretty much anything it wants. This is why periodically you'll hear on the news like Congress is having an investigation into, say, baseball, steroids in baseball, or the plight of migrant workers, or refugees in Syria, or Benghazi. That's called oversight. Congress can basically form a committee, investigate what it would like, and pass on a resolution or a decision about what to do about it later. So before they pass a law, in theory at least, they conduct oversight. They look into the issue and they decide what exactly they're supposed to do about it. So that's the first one, again, is the ability to investigate pretty much whatever they feel like. The second one, appointment. This is what we were talking about in the last chapter. Remember, the president picks who's on the Supreme Court, and for that matter, in the lower courts and on the cabinet. But Congress has to approve it. Congress has to approve anyone that the president appoints. So the president can pick whomever he wants, but Congress has to approve his appointments. And so as a result, that gives them a good amount of power. It stops the president from just picking, his dog to be a member, Secretary of State or whatever. The power of approval for the appointments is very powerful. The last one, the scope. The idea here is that Congress has a very different scope of power than anyone else. They are looking at the entire country. And they've got a very broad scope. They're looking at the entire country, and their goal is limited government. Their goal is just basically to keep everything under control. So they don't want the president to get out of hand. They don't want the states to do anything out of hand. So basically, again, think of them as sort of like the national referee. Their job is to pass laws to keep everybody in line. Okay, now we talk a little bit about congressional membership. So again, I'll take a moment to write down congressional membership and apportionment. Do you like the cup? It's from Disneyland. Apportionment is how the seats in Congress are given out. Apportionment is, again, the term for how the seats in Congress are given out. One more time, apportionment is how the seats in government are... Gosh, sorry, it's late. Apportionment is the term for how the seats in Congress are given out. In the Senate, it's easy. Every state gets 2, so there's no need to worry about it. In the House, however, the population, remember, is how you determine it. So apportionment is how they gave out the seats. What we do now is every 10 years, we go through a process called reapportionment. Reapportionment is when we look at the populations of all the states and we redistribute the seats. So, for example, we look and see which states have gotten bigger and which states have gotten smaller, and we readjust. So states can gain or lose votes in the House of Representatives based on the reapportionment. The process of reapportionment requires the census. The national census is a survey done every 10 years, which looks for things like population, income, age, gender, race, etc. It's basically just measuring statistics about the country. But from the census, states can either gain or lose seats. So states that see a huge population increase will see their number of votes go up, and states that see a population decrease will see their number of votes go down. The number of the people in the House is always going to be 435. That's because of the Reapportionment Act of 1929. The Reapportionment Act of 1929 permanently sets the House of Representatives at 435. So, now, instead of literally adding new members to Congress, like adding new seats or taking away seats, all we do now is give and take. So the states that gain the most pick up seats from the states that lost the most. So, for example, in 2020, if North Carolina's population jumps by 4 million and Texas loses 4 million, we might pick up a vote in Congress and they might lose a vote in Congress. And again, this happens every 10 years at the reapportionment. Once you reapportion the seats, you then go through redistricting. Redistricting is how you draw the lines in the state to determine each representative's district. Again, redistricting is redrawing the lines within the state to figure out each representative's district. What part of the state do they represent? Normally, redistricting is a simple process, but when you gain or lose seats, it becomes problematic. So, for example, North Carolina is made of 13 congressional districts at the moment. If we lose a seat and go down to 12, that means you have to redraw the lines so that 13 can become 12. Or if we gain one, you then have to divide up one of the districts to make 14 districts. Districting and redistricting are supposed to be equal. They're supposed to be fair. You're supposed to make it so that everyone fits into a district relatively equally and all the state's populations are represented equally. But in practice, that isn't how it works. The job of redistricting falls to the state governments. So the states are the ones that figure it out for sure. And so because of that, the state governments will oftentimes draw the districts to the advantage of the majority party. Again, the states will oftentimes draw the districts so they're to the advantage of the majority party. What that's called is gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is when you redraw the lines to fit the benefit of the majority party. So, for example, the Republicans control North Carolina's legislature. So when they redraw the lines, when they do the redistricting process, they want to make it so as many Republican districts as possible are created and as few Democratic districts as possible are created. What they do essentially is they group together Democratic voters in one district and divide up Republican voters into 4 districts so that the Democrats only get 1 and they get 4. It's dirty, it's illegal, and everybody does it. Gerrymandering is a time-honored tradition in American politics because it's really, really hard to prove in court that that's the only reason you were you're essentially trying to cheat. North Carolina in particular has a history of having gerrymandered districts. What is and is not gerrymandering is basically determined by 3 big court cases. The first one, Westbury v. Sanders. The case of Westbury v. Sanders says that districts must be roughly equal population-wise. So you can't make one district of 10 million and 10 districts of 1 million. That doesn't work. The districts have to be roughly equal in size of population. That's Westbury v. Sanders. The next one, Gomillion v. Lightfoot, which is 2 real people. Gomillion v. Lightfoot says that you cannot draw districts based only on race. So you cannot make a congressional district that's, only for African Americans and one that's only for Latinos and one that's only for white people, etc. That's not okay. But Hunt v. Cromartie, the third case, Hunt v. Cromartie says that race can be one of many things that you look at. So, the fact that this neighborhood is entirely African American is just a coincidence. You just can't draw it, so it's only one race. That's what those 2 together basically mean. But again, otherwise, gerrymandering is perfectly legal and done quite a lot. Okay, so now what you're looking at is privileges. What are some of the privileges you get for being in Congress and so forth? Starting with the committees. One of the privileges you get in Congress is the ability to sit on certain committees. The committees are the organizations that that basically do the investigating and do have certain powers and so forth. The committees basically are given out through what's called seniority rule. Seniority rule basically means that the people who have been in Congress the longest get to pick their favorite committee. So in other words, if you are, say, an expert in economics, you might really want to be on the tax committee, but you don't get the first crack at it if you've just been elected. Instead, we look to the older members of Congress and see what did they want. The second thing, you do get a congressional paycheck. It is paid for by the average American citizen taxes. That being said, nowadays most congressmen are independently wealthy, especially in the Senate, where most of the senators literally are millionaires. Still, they are, they made money from law or medicine or whatever it was they went in prior to office, but they do still collect a federal paycheck. Now, the catch is, of course, Congress votes for their own pay increases. So in theory, Congress could just keep voting themselves raises. However, there is a constitutional amendment that forbids them from voting on a raise that year. So essentially, they can't automatically keep giving themselves new pay raises, if you will, which again, probably a good idea. The next one, franking. Franking is a fun one. I just sort of bring it up just because it's a really fun term. Franking means the ability to send out free postage. The congressman can just sign letters and sign packages like on envelopes, and their signature or frank counts as postage. And so basically, again, it's a weird little benefit of Congress that they could just send out letters and packages for free. The goal was originally so that they could keep their constituents informed by sending out constant updates and letters and so forth. Nowadays, it's just their way of sending out like free mail and things like that. But again, it's a weird thing. The last thing, talking about non-payment bonuses, what you're talking about there are things like intangible things, like respect. Congressmen are generally, it's a position of power. We look to them with respect and so forth. And so as a result, you get a benefit from being in Congress that can't necessarily be measured in dollars and cents. It's something you put on your resume and so forth. And of course, congressmen always have their eye on something else. Congressman is a very popular way to become, say, a governor or, even president or something down the line. So that would fall into the non-payment bonus. Under general characteristics, okay, what you're looking for under general characteristics is who exactly becomes a representative or a senator. Representatives are generally younger and more diverse. There are more women in the House of Representatives, there are more minorities in the House of Representatives, and again, as a whole, it's younger. I want to say the average age in the House is like 45, 50, which doesn't seem that young, but it's much younger than the Senate. On the other hand, the Senate is mostly old, male, white, rich guys. The number of African Americans in the Senate, off the top of my head, I think is like 3. There used to be an Asian American. I think he passed away. But for the most part, it's just, again, pretty much just old white guys. Women, too, are a fairly distinct minority in the Senate. This isn't necessarily by design, it's just how that works out. Likewise, again, the average age of a senator is up in the 60s. Senators tend to be much older than the House of Representatives. But again, that's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Remember that we said that the Senate is considered to be the older and wiser group, and so as a result, we look to them to be older and wiser. We look to them to be average and so forth. Their average age to be older and so forth. Okay, I think that's all the big important things that you need. Now, technically this lesson was only about 16 minutes, but I have a feeling you're going to be pausing it and rewinding it and so forth. And if you haven't, you probably should go back and rewatch it. When I come back on Tuesday, we will continue on with the notes. Your test over this stuff, I believe, is next Friday. Let me check my calendar. Yes, your test over this stuff is next Friday. So, again, we'll continue on with the notes next week. If we get through the notes, we'll do a Kahoot and so forth. But otherwise, have a good weekend. Bye-bye.